Thanks all. As we rattle through the agenda, we now have time to take motion 7 before the break. So I'd like to invite the motion 7 speakers to come to the front if you're about to speak on motion 7. Proposing the motion from Wales, Dr. Daniel Jones. Please declare your interest.
Cool. Diolch, Bore Dag and Hadledd. In the health and care system across the UK, we are in the midst of a severe workforce crisis, and that translates to regular unsafe medical staffing levels, both in the community and in our hospitals, and it is our members every day who are having to deal with the consequences of that understaffing. And that includes dangerous cross-cover situations. It includes not being able to see patients on time, etc. We'll all be familiar with these kind of scenarios. But all too often, when it is actually incumbent on the employer to be meeting the staffing levels required, either through hiring additional doctors or putting out locums or escalating locum rates as appropriate, that does not happen. And employers, certainly I can speak from experience in a Welsh context, are often all too happy to see gaps appear and to sit on them. And the consequences of this are often just borne out on individual doctors, either in the form of mistakes arising from these unsafe settings that then results in referrals to our regulator, or indeed just that excess workload compromising their health and well-being and leading to a burnout, in turn generating the retention crisis and putting us around this vicious cycle. So, what we do have in certain parts of the UK in different forms is examples of legislation for particular healthcare professional groups, sadly not doctors in Wales, but we do have nurses that do help to reset that relationship, and they put it incumbent on the employers to be reporting on staffing levels and for that to be held to account, usually by central authorities of government when they are not meeting them. And it has helped in many instances, as our RCN colleagues in Wales do regularly tell us. So what this motion will do is push us forward on a programme of work in that regard, and it will also help to push the local negotiating committees on this, citing the standards that are out there from the Royal College of Physicians and others to be pushing on safe medical staffing and to get the safe medical staffing that both we and our patients deserve. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
We've had a call to vote, but as we have a speaker against the motion, I'd like to hear that first. Speaking against the motion, Dr. I apologise, I absolutely murdered your name. Catriona Renison from London, speaking against the motion.
Hi all, so my name is Katrina. I'm currently an FY2 in East London. Now, I'm going to do a very classic BMA thing and say that while I agree with the spirit of the motion, I have some concerns about the specific wording of this motion. We all agree that safe staffing is vitally important, and I don't think there'll be a doctor in the room who hasn't worked an understaffed rota, carried 2 bleeps, stayed late, or have a colleague unfortunately be unwell for a shift and have to cover at least 2, if not 3, people's work. However, this motion, particularly little 4, is calling for legislation which is very similar to the bill currently going through Parliament, which has recently been voted down by the House of Lords, to introduce minimum staffing levels as a means of busting strikes. Now, of course, at the moment we're embroiled in industrial action for full pay restoration, and I worry that were we to be campaigning for this legislation, we're effectively shooting ourselves in the foot. Were there to be minimum staffing legislation for doctors, we are impeding our own right to strike with the effectiveness that we've been doing so far, we would not be able to have a strike with no derogations like we have just had. We would not be able to have the impact that we are having. So while safe staffing is vitally important, and I do believe that we should lobby for it, I would like to call for this motion to be taken as a reference so that we can think about ways in which this could be implemented without impeding our right to take industrial action, to strike, and without the responsibility falling back on us if we are accused of breaking the law as doctors by not providing minimum staffing. Therefore, I would urge you to take this motion as a reference and work towards safe staffing in a constructive but different manner. Thank you.
Thank you. We've received calls to move to a vote. However, as we have time, lunch is not quite ready, unfortunately, and we have another speaker with a motion in bracket. I'd like to, at Chair's discretion, hear the next speaker, and then we will move on to a vote. So speaking for the motion, I'd like to invite Dr. Will Sapwell from Yorkshire.
Chair, conference, and Dr. Denison, thank you for making that point, because I'd like to follow on directly from that, in that I'd like to encourage conference to actually pass this motion purely for the, well, not purely, but mostly for the hilarity of helping Mr. Barclay dig a deeper hole for himself in trying to pass a bill mandating minimum staffing on strike days that can't be met with current staffing on normal days. I think actually if we allow him to go down this line, he's going to end up making a trap for himself, which will be very politically embarrassing for him and the Conservatives. But on a serious note, getting these safe staffing levels is just vital patient safety work. So this needs to be passed in full, and we need to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to right to reply, it is looking likely... Oh, sorry, Emma, I'll let you go first to your point of information.
Sorry, point of information. One of the amendments that we lobbied for in the Lords to the recent minimum staffing levels bill was to impose a requirement for safe staffing levels on all non-strike days. That amendment did fail, but it failed for many of the reasons that Will has just described. We have safe staffing on strike days due to SAS and consultant colleague cover, and we have only had one request for derogation in both sets of strikes, which we granted, and we then discovered that the safe staffing had actually already been provided by our SAS and consultant colleagues in that case, and we revoked the derogation. Safe staffing can be provided on strike days. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move to right to reply, we will be moving shortly to motion 8. So if you're planning to speak on motion 8, please come up to the front or join the green room if you're online. I'd now like to invite Dr. Jones to reply to the debate.
Thank you very much, Emma, for raising that point of information, which I was also going to cite, which is, as you quite rightly put, the BMA is already trying to utilise this narrative around medical safe staffing that the Secretary of State has introduced, and it was doing that in the House of Lords already, so that is already going on. I'm not particularly keen to conflate the issues. I think that this is something that we should be doing anyway, and what I point out is that Part 4 cites examples of legislation that are already on the statute book, and they have allowed nurses in Wales to safely conduct effective industrial action that has resulted in an improved pay offer for themselves. So I recognise the points, but I think that our LNCs and our junior doctor committees can have the discretion and the ability to work around and get this through in a way that doesn't jeopardise our full pay restoration campaign. Diolch.
And thank you. And before we move to a vote, I'd just like to clarify, would you like this motion to be taken as a block, substantive motion, or in parts? Can that be done, Mod Team? We'd like to be voting on parts 1 to 3, and then part 4 as a separate vote. Could we be voting on parts 1 to 3 in block? Is that possible? Whilst we wait for the mod team, the flamingo is actually white. The more krill it's eaten, the pinker it turns.
Whilst we're waiting for confirmation from the mod team that we can take parts 1 to 3 as one and then part 4 separate, we will be moving on to motion 8 next before lunch in order to try and fit more of part 2 in after lunch. So the deadline has already passed for that. It passed at 12 o'clock. But after we vote for this, if you're going to speak on motion 8, please make your way down to the front.
We've had a thumbs up from the back, so it looks likely that we'll be voting on parts 1 to 3 and then be voting on parts 4. So the vote for parts 1 to 3 will be shortly opening. And we've had a call to read out the parts. Part 1, work with relevant partners to further develop and advertise minimum standards for safe medical staffing. Part 2, recommend LNCs to regularly review medical staffing levels and lobby locally for safe levels. And Part 3, lobby relevant national bodies to regularly publish comprehensive and up-to-date workforce data, including whole-time equivalent staffing levels and vacancies. And parts 1 to 3 have passed. We will now shortly be voting on part 4. Part 4. Voting will be opening now. And part 4 is lobby governments across the UK to introduce legislation for minimal medical staffing levels analogous to the Nurse Staffing Levels Wales Act in 2016 and the Health and Care Staffing in Scotland Act in 2019. And whilst we wait for that to come in, last April DMB secured bin workers in Windsor a 17% pay rise. And that has passed. We'll be shortly moving on to motion 8, and I'll be handing over chair responsibilities to Dr. Brockergood.